anti-Semite by the Jews, because this is the defense mechanism that they use to cover up their crimes and to prevent analysis of the criminal action that has happened, which so very often leads to a Jewish perpetrator. The Jewish philosophy is, how did Franz Seiler describe it the other day? It is an excuse to commit crimes. That's all it is. You put all your morals aside and you can do anything. That's the Jewish philosophy. And of course the other part of it, for the people who actually are Jewish and following the dictates of the Talmud, believe that they are better than everybody else, and they act accordingly, and we see the horror in the world that is generated by that insanity.
You must understand, the leading Bolsheviks who took over Russia were not Russians. They hated Russians. They hated Christians. Driven by ethnic hatred, they tortured and slaughtered millions of Russians without a shred of human remorse. The October Revolution was not what you call in America the Russian Revolution. It was an invasion and conquest over the Russian people. More of my countrymen suffered horrific crimes at the blood-stained hands than any people or nation ever suffered in the entirety of human history. It cannot be understated. Bolshevism was the greatest human slaughter of all time. The fact that most of the world is ignorant of this reality is proof that the global media itself is in the hands of the perpetrators. We cannot state that all Jews are Bolsheviks, but without Jews, there will be no Bolshevism. For a Jew, nothing is more insulting than the truth. The blood-matted Jewish terrorists murdered 66 million in Russia from 1918 to 1957. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Nobel Prize-winning novelist, historian, and victim of Jewish Bolshevism. The Jewish Bolsheviks implemented a policy known as collectivization. By collectivization, they could take away the peasants' land in the name of the state. This was what Marx himself described as the essence of communism, to abolish private property. In early 1930, over 91% of the agricultural land was collectivized. The communists were taking every good from the peasants. All weapons of the civilians were also confiscated by the state.
He ordered NKVD to confiscate all grain, all food from these areas. By doing that, he knew he's condemning them to death.
Картошку, свеклу, эту самую капусту, соленая капуста в бочке, с бочкою. Куда забираешь, садить же нужно. Нужно посадочку, никто не собрать и все.
During the periods of 1921 to 1922, 1932 to 1933, and 1946 to 1947, the Jewish Bolshevik regime deliberately mechanized 3 series of genocidal man-made famines aimed at starving farmers in Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia. Millions died a slow death, and people resorted to eating grass, and some even to cannibalism. This real Holocaust is today referred to as the Holodomor. Encyclopedia Britannica estimates around 8 million people, 5 million of them Ukrainian, were starved to death by the Stalin-Kaganovich famine alone, and the 3 Holodomor genocides together resulted in a death toll of 16.5 million. Russian historian Alexander Solzhenitsyn estimated that between 1917 to 1958, the Jewish Bolshevik regime managed to exterminate up towards 60 million Europeans, including victims of the forced collectivization, the hunger, large purges, expulsions, banishment, executions, and mass deaths at gulags. Industrial-scale murders like these are an essential part of communist theory. With these famines, Lenin, Stalin, Kaganovich, and all their Jewish agents destroyed any remaining resistance to the communists. An order from Lenin and Trotsky, the Red Terror was first announced by the Jew Jacob Sverdlov. Lenin stipulated that 3/4 of mankind may die if necessary, to ensure the other quarter for communism. Lenin even outlined the purpose for the famines by stating, destroying the peasant economy and driving the peasant from the country to the town, the famine creates a proletariat. Lenin also regarded Europeans as animals. It is precisely now, and only now, when in the starving regions people are eating human flesh, and hundreds if not thousands of corpses are littering the roads, that we can, and therefore must, carry out the confiscation of church valuables with the most savage and merciless energy, not stopping short of crushing any resistance. He continued, the greater the number of representatives of the reactionary clergy and reactionary bourgeoisie we succeed in executing for this reason, the better. Leon Trotsky said, we must turn Russia into a desert populated by white Negroes, upon whom we shall impose a tyranny such as the most terrible Eastern despots never dreamt of. The only difference is that this will be a left-wing tyranny, not a right-wing tyranny. It will be a red tyranny, and not a white one. We mean the word red, literally, because we shall shed such floods of blood as we will make all the human losses suffered in the capitalist wars pale by comparison. The biggest bankers across the ocean will work in the closest possible contact with us. If we win the revolution, we shall establish the power of Zionism upon the wreckage of the revolution's funeral, and we shall become a power before which the whole world will sink to its knees. We shall know what real power is, by means of terror and bloodbaths. We shall reduce the Russian intelligentsia to a state of complete stupefaction and idiocy, and to an animal existence. Mass arrests in the middle of the night, kidnapping, executions, and brutal tactics of torture took place. The communist plan was to use psychological warfare, torture, and terror to intimidate their white enemies into submission. Gendrich Yagoda was a Jewish secret police official who served as the director of the NKVD. A major Israeli publication, Ynet News, revealed the truth about Yagoda, saying, "We must not forget that some of the greatest mass murders of all time were Jewish." It goes on, Gendrich Yagoda was the greatest Jewish murderer of the 20th century. He is responsible for the deaths of at least 10 million people. The Jewish Checkout was a secret police force created through the NKVD, later KGB, on December 20, 1917, by the Jew Vladimir Lenin, and was consequently led by the Jew Felix Dzerzhinsky. Jews made up nearly 80% of the rank and file Cheka agents, reports Bruce Lincoln, an American professor of Russian history. The Cheka rounded up Christians and all those who did not support the Jewish Bolshevik government. The Cheka practiced torture methods including skinning victims alive, scalping, proning with barbed wire, crucifixion, hanging, stoning to death. Women and children were also victims of the terror. They would sometimes be tortured and raped before being shot. Children between the ages of 8 to 13 were imprisoned and executed. With hot irons, the Bolsheviks tortured those prisoners who were caught. Some victims were actually sliced to pieces, bit by bit, while others were branded with hot irons, their eyes poked out to induce unbearable pain. Burning coals were inserted into women's genitals. Often in views of victims' family members, prisoners were publicly hanged. communists in Kharkov placed their victims in a row and nailed their hands to a table, cut around their wrist with a knife, poured boiling water over the hands, and pulled off the skin. They poked out eyes, broke bones in legs and arms, and extracted nails, cut off hands, ears, and noses. Victims were submerged in boiling ore or tar. Victims were dosed with petrol and burned alive.
Lazar Kaganovich was the Jewish head of the KGB and was well known for his purges of those who opposed Jewish control. It is argued that Stalin, whose second wife was Kaganovich's sister, was a mere figurehead. Some believe that the numerous Jews below Stalin in all significant positions ran the show. As proof, some point out that many of the churches were burnt to the ground, while the synagogues were left standing. Many priests were forced to sweep the streets and others were murdered. The Jewish Soviet leaders held rabbis in high esteem, and those people who dared to criticize the Jewish supremacy were mercilessly murdered as anti-Semitism became a crime punishable by death in the Soviet Union.
The Jew Kaganovich ordered the deaths of millions and the total destruction of Christian monuments and churches. Among these victims were bishops, professors, doctors, policemen, officers, lawyers, civil servants, journalists, writers, artists, nurses, workers, and farmers. The most intelligent and the highest achieving segment of the population was totally wiped out, which left a population of ignorant workers, peasants, and a powerful Jewish ruling elite. Lenin said, "We must hate. Hatred is the basis of communism. Children must be taught to hate their parents if they're not communists." From the American Hebrew of September 8, 1920. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was the work of Jewish brains, of Jewish dissatisfaction, of Jewish planning, whose goal is to create a new order in the world. What was performed in so excellent a way in Russia, thanks to Jewish brains, and because of Jewish dissatisfaction, and by Jewish planning, shall also through the same Jewish mental and physical forces become a reality all over the world. A righteous Jew, Henry H. Klein, explained that Zionism is a political program for the conquest of the world. Zionism destroyed Russia by violence as a warning to other nations. It is destroying the United States through bankruptcy, as Lenin advised. Zionism wants another world war if necessary to enslave the people. Our manpower is scattered over the world. Will we be destroyed from within, or will we wake up in time to prevent it? The Rabbi Stephen Samuel Wise in New York said, "Some called it communism, but I call it Judaism."
People were being shot day and night throughout the biggest country in the world. Stalin even got to the point of killing people by random, by quotas.
Let's say 100,000 in Tambov district. Okay, that's it. Whoever they grabbed and shot will be fulfilling quota. They wouldn't care about names. Then after the quotas were fulfilled, the local authorities would report to Stalin, to Central Committee, and asked for additional quotas.
Хрущев просил лимит, вот, значит, там что-то ему там разрешалось, что-то 7 или 8 тысяч врагов народа. Он просил, дайте мне лимит на 17 тысяч.
An additional quota will be given, and after fulfilling, they would again ask for additional quota, and so it will go in circles. It was like mincemeat machine, you know. It was just killing and killing and killing.
Sometimes the Jewish butchers cut open the stomachs of their victims, pulled out a length of small intestine, nailed it to a telegraph pole, and with the whip forced the victim to run circles around the pole until the whole intestine became unraveled and the victim died the most agonizing death possible. Pregnant Christian women were chained to trees and their babies cut out of their bodies. Some victims in Kiev were placed in a coffin with a decomposing body and buried alive, only to be dug up after half an hour. Lenin was still not satisfied with this and reported, "More power to the terror." The Bolsheviks would eliminate every free thinker. Trotsky wanted every individual to be a rootless soldier of labor, and he thought that all those demanding free speech, free press, and free trade unions should be shot like dogs. If ordered to move, they were forced to obey. If they refused, they were deserters who would be punished with death. Every move was at gunpoint. Trotsky often executed his victims personally in the most cruelest ways. He happily ordered disciplinary executions, and he even ordered children murdered. Officers and their families were executed for disobeying orders. The Jew Grigory Zinoviev, real name Hirsch Apfelbaum, as head of the Communist International, wrote in an article in the Draznaya Gazeta in Moscow, September 1st, 1918, "We will make our hearts cruel, hard, and immovable, so that no mercy will enter them, so that they will not quiver at the sight of a sea of enemy blood. We will let loose the floodgates of that sea. Without mercy, without sparing, we will kill our enemies in scores of hundreds. Let them be thousands. Let them drown themselves in their own blood. Let there be floods of blood of the bourgeoisie. More blood, as much as possible." Every people who dared to criticize the regime would be branded as anti-Semitic and punished with death. Christians, priests, and the most attractive youth, and all non-Jewish intellectuals were the first to be exterminated. In years to come, Stalin's crime against humanity would make Lenin's Red Terror crumble in comparison. The Gulag was the Jewish NKVD system of forced labor and extermination camps. Any person suspected of disagreeing with the Jewish Bolshevik government was kidnapped by the Jewish secret police and deported to a Gulag.
Vilkām trīs, vēl divas krievietes ar ragutiem vilkām skatiem. Šausmīgs sniegs bija par upi vilkām. Bet tad tiešām, ka mandēliņu vilka, tad tos sargi bija noņemti. Tā jau viss, kas mira, bērns glabāja pie privātajiem. tos neskaitīja, ka tie ir apcietināti, tos pie privāti. Mums jau rakpuro. Un tad viens atkal bērnīši nomira. Tad es neatceros, cik vai bija pusgads vai gads bija. Tad es atkal vilku to. Un tad es tikko aizgājis pie savu dēlu. Un tā bija pēdīga reize. Vienreiz es apcietu.
The most infamous of these camps was the desolate island in the Siberian river, Nazino, as known as Cannibal Island. On this island, the inhabitants underwent torture by starvation to the point that they ate each other and survived out of sheer desperation. Almost immediately, the newcomers to the islands were attacked and eaten. Corpses were butchered and human flesh were being cooked and eaten. Several bodies were found with their liver, breasts, calves, heart, and lungs removed.
Вот здесь и людоедство, здесь и все открылось. Потому что каждый хотел спастись любыми путями. Не все люди были такие, что могли спокойно, поэтому и описывается, что и убивали, и вырезали икры, и вырезали груди, и очень много можно было и других историй вспомнить.
Даже допустим, человек только уже вот должен умереть, люди уже стояли и ждали, когда он умрет, чтобы какой-то кусок мяса взять. Сырым мясом ели, сырое мясо ели. Уже не думали, что он больной чем-то или не больной, лишь бы только поесть и хоть, может, еще день прожить.
Едешь мимо острова, мясо в тряпках висит. Человечье мясо резали и привязывали.
Началась охота за людьми, молодых особенно, за девушками, за молодыми. Их просто или убивали, или просто отрезали, какие-то, что называется, части тела мягкие. На костре жарили, съедали тут же. В общем, страшные вещи начались.
Да, на острове конвоир был, Веников Костя, молодой парень. Он к девчонке одной. Такая хорошая девчонка, а он все караулил ее. Приедет да охраняет эту девчонку. А потом вздумал, уехал помыться. Он товарищу наказал, вы за ней приглядываете. А тот что, столь народу вокруг. А ее привязали, руки назад к тополине, и груди отрезали ей, икры отрезали, мускулы. Все, где можно есть. Голодные люди, есть надо. А парень-то, когда приехал, она еще жива была. Хотел спасти, умерла она, истекла, тут же умерла. И вот, парню-то не повезло.
The founders of the Gulag death camp system were the two Jews, Naftali Frankel and Levi Birnbaum. The infamous Soviet gulags were under the direct control of the mass-murdering Jew Gendrich Yagoda. He was not the only one involved in the running of these camps. The Jew Lev Inchir was the commissar for Soviet death camp transit administration. Ferin, Rapoport, Kogan, and Zhuk were commissars of the death camps and slave labor. They also supervised the mass deaths of laborers during the construction of the White Sea-Baltic Canal. Jews were the commandants of 11 out of 12 main gulags, or concentration camps, including the camp system directors Matvei Berman and Herschel Yehuda. A particularly cruel sadist was the Jew Leonid Reichman, head of the NKVD's special department and the organization's chief interrogator. Ironically, communism, aka the workers' paradise, was pretty much the opposite. The policy hurt every worker and benefited only the communists in high power. Everyone who opposed Stalin's collectivization paid with their lives. Communism was not created by the masses to overthrow the bankers. Communism was created by the bankers to overthrow and enslave the masses.
Голод, холод, нужду. В чем же мы виноваты, что так все случилось? И кто за это в ответе? За все наши муки и страдания.